What if one of the most famous promises ever spoken by Jesus has been quietly misunderstood for nearly 2,000 years? Millions of people repeat the words, "Ask, and it will be given to you," believing they are being taught to plead with heaven, hoping that one day God might respond. But what if the word Jesus actually spoke carried an entirely different meaning, one filled with confidence instead of desperation, authority instead of fear, and relationship instead of distance? Hidden within the ancient Aramaic language is a single word that transforms the way we understand prayer forever. Once you hear it, the way Jesus himself spoke it, you may never pray the same way again. For centuries, many of the original nuances of Jesus' spoken teachings gradually faded as his words passed from Aramaic into Greek and later into other languages. While the core message of the gospel remained, layers of linguistic depth were often simplified through translation. Then, in 1945, near Nag Hammadi, in Upper Egypt, an extraordinary archaeological discovery changed the conversation forever. A collection of ancient Christian writings, now known as the Nag Hammadi Library, was uncovered in sealed clay jars. Although these texts were never included in the official biblical canon, they preserved early traditions and revealed how deeply the first followers valued the original language and spiritual expressions used by Jesus. They remind us that his spoken words carried a richness that cannot always be captured by a single, translated term. There is a profound reason Jesus taught and healed in Aramaic. He did not teach in Greek, the language in which the New Testament would later be written, nor did he normally address ordinary people in formal Hebrew. He spoke the everyday language of the people because Aramaic was more than a means of communication. It carried rhythm, intention, determination, and spiritual resonance. Early Christian traditions understood that these sounds were not merely spoken, they were experienced. Every sacred word was believed to carry a living vibration capable of awakening something deeply familiar within the human soul. Many spiritual scholars describe this as reconnecting with our original design, the divine pattern placed within humanity from the beginning. That is why pronouncing the ancient words of Jesus with reverence still holds such fascination today. The word for this episode is shaloo, pronounced sha-dasha-shloo, meaning to ask with trust, confident expectation, and covenant authority, not helpless begging. When modern readers hear the word ask, they often imagine someone pleading from a place of weakness. They picture an individual hoping that God might eventually notice their request. Yet the word shaloo, to ask with trust, confident expectation, and covenant authority, describes something entirely different. It portrays the confidence of a beloved child approaching a loving father. There is humility, certainly, but never humiliation. There is dependence, but never fear of rejection. This understanding fits perfectly within the teaching found in the Gospel of Luke 11:9-10. Jesus was not encouraging endless desperation. He was revealing a relationship built upon trust. Every invitation to shaloo was an invitation to remember who God is and, just as importantly, who you are before him. Perhaps the greatest obstacle in prayer has never been God's willingness to answer. Perhaps it has been our misunderstanding of the very first word he invited us to speak. Imagine two people standing before the same door. The first arrives filled with fear. Their shoulders are heavy, their voice uncertain, and every sentence sounds like an apology. Deep inside, they believe they are unworthy even to be heard. They speak because they have no other option, but they expect nothing in return. The second person approaches that very same door with humility, yet with quiet confidence. They know the one inside loves them. They do not demand. They do not manipulate. They simply trust the relationship that already exists. Their request flows naturally from faith rather than panic. According to the ancient Aramaic understanding, Jesus was describing the second person. When he spoke shaloo, pronounced shaloo, meaning to ask with trust, confident expectation, and covenant authority. He was inviting his listeners to abandon the mindset of spiritual slavery. A servant begs because he fears rejection. A child asks because love has already opened the door. Think about how many prayers begin with anxiety. Many people unknowingly believe they must convince God to care, persuade him to listen, or somehow earn his attention through enough repetition or emotion. But nowhere do we see Jesus portraying the Father as distant, reluctant, or unwilling. Instead, He constantly revealed a Father who already knows what his children need before they speak. That truth transforms everything. Prayer is no longer an attempt to overcome God's resistance. It becomes a response to God's invitation. The more we understand shaloo, the less our prayers sound like fearful negotiations. They become conversations shaped by trust, surrender, and spiritual authority. This is not arrogance. It is confidence rooted in relationship. It is the confidence Jesus demonstrated throughout his own life. Perhaps this is why so many sincere believers pray for years, yet continue feeling spiritually exhausted. They have been taught the words of prayer, but not always the posture of the heart behind those words. Once that posture changes, every conversation with God begins to change as well. If this teaching has opened a new perspective for you, our Aramaic Wisdom Guide can help you continue this journey. After all, true knowledge sets us free. You'll find the link in the comments. But what if shaloo was only the beginning? In the next chapter, you'll discover why this ancient word doesn't simply change the way you pray, it changes the way you understand your own spiritual identity. And the best is yet to come. In the next chapters, you'll discover what could change everything for you. For many people, prayer has become an emergency response instead of a daily relationship. They seek God only when circumstances become unbearable, when fear grows louder than faith, or when life feels completely beyond their control. Yet Jesus demonstrated something entirely different. Before miracles, before healing, before feeding the crowds, and even before facing the greatest suffering of his earthly life, he lived from a place of constant communion with the Father. His authority did not appear in moments of crisis. It was cultivated long before the crises arrived. This is where shaloo pronounced shaloo, meaning to ask with trust, confident expectation. And covenant authority reveals another remarkable layer. The word is not describing someone desperately trying to gain God's attention. It describes someone who already believes they have been welcomed into his presence. That distinction changes the atmosphere of every prayer. Think of a child entering a loving parent's home. The child does not rehearse every sentence, in fear of being rejected. There is no need to prove worthiness before speaking. Love has already established belonging. The conversation begins from relationship, not from uncertainty. This is the spiritual posture Jesus continually revealed. When people approached him asking for healing, he rarely focused first on the size of their problem. Instead, he consistently redirected their attention toward faith, trust, and confidence in God's presence. Again and again, he invited ordinary men and women to stop defining themselves by fear and begin living from the reality of divine relationship. Many believers unknowingly carry an invisible image of God as distant. They imagine heaven as a place that must constantly be persuaded. Every unanswered prayer seems to confirm that God is withholding something, forcing them to beg harder, pray longer, or somehow become more deserving. But what if the greatest barrier has never been God's willingness? What if the barrier has been the image we carry within ourselves? When your identity changes, your language changes. When your language changes, your prayers change. And when your prayers change, your expectations begin to change as well. This is why understanding the original Aramaic words matters so deeply. Jesus was not simply teaching people what to say. He was teaching them how to live from an entirely different inner reality. Authority was never meant to produce pride. True authority produces peace, because a person who knows they are loved no longer needs to shout to be heard. In the next chapter, we will uncover why this ancient understanding of shaloo also explains why so many sincere prayers seem to remain unanswered, and the answer may surprise you completely. One of the greatest misconceptions about prayer is the belief that persistence means convincing God to change his mind. Countless people have spent years repeating the same requests, hoping that enough emotion, enough sacrifice, or enough suffering might finally persuade heaven to respond. While perseverance certainly has a place in spiritual life, Jesus never portrayed the Father as reluctant or unwilling to bless his children. Instead, he repeatedly revealed a God whose heart is already inclined toward love. This is why the ancient meaning of shaloo becomes so important. Pronounced shaloo, meaning to ask with trust, confident expectation, and covenant authoritas, not eliminate persistence. It transforms the reason behind persistence. The difference is profound. Desperation repeats because it fears rejection. Faith remains steadfast because it trusts the relationship. These may appear similar from the outside. Both continue praying. Both continue seeking. Both continue believing. Yet internally they are completely different worlds. One heart is driven by anxiety. The other is anchored in peace. Notice how often Jesus encouraged people with the words, "Do not be afraid." Fear was never presented as the doorway into God's presence. Trust was, imagine beginning every prayer already believing that the Father welcomes your voice. Imagine speaking with reverence, while carrying the quiet certainty that His love is not something you must earn. That inner transformation alone changes the emotional weight of every conversation with God. Prayer stops becoming a desperate attempt to escape life. It becomes the place where life is continually renewed. This perspective also protects us from another danger. Divine authority is never permission to control God or demand outcomes according to our own desires. Jesus Himself demonstrated perfect surrender, trusting the Father's wisdom even when the path ahead included suffering. Real authority always walks hand in hand with humility. It is confidence without arrogance, faith without manipulation, expectation without entitlement. Perhaps this is the balance modern believers have been longing to rediscover. Not louder prayers, not longer prayers, but deeper trust. The kind of trust hidden within one ancient Aramaic word that has quietly survived across centuries, waiting to be heard once again. Perhaps you're wondering why these original teachings remained hidden for so long. That's why we created the Aramaic Wisdom Guide. Because true knowledge sets us free. You'll find it in the comments below by now. One truth should be becoming clear. Jesus was never inviting people into a life of spiritual uncertainty. He was inviting them into a relationship so secure that every prayer could begin with confidence instead of fear. The tragedy is that many sincere believers have spent years approaching God as strangers, when Jesus was teaching them to approach as beloved children. This is where the beauty of shaloo reaches its fullest expression. Shaloo, pronounced shaloo, meaning to ask with trust, confident expectation. And covenant authority is not merely about speaking different words. It is about becoming a different person from the inside out. Think about the prayers that have shaped your life. How many were spoken through anxiety? How many were driven by the fear that perhaps God was silent because you had somehow failed Him? How many times did you believe you needed to prove your faith before expecting an answer? Now imagine replacing those thoughts with the understanding Jesus was revealing. Imagine beginning every prayer with the quiet certainty that the Father's heart is already open toward you. Imagine speaking with gratitude before seeing the answer. Imagine asking without the hidden fear of rejection. This is not positive thinking. It is a transformation of spiritual identity. The first disciples did not astonish the world because they mastered religious formulas. They lived with an unshakable confidence that they belonged to God. Their courage, peace, compassion, and endurance flowed from that relationship. Their authority was never manufactured. It was received. Perhaps that same invitation has been waiting for you all along. Not to pray louder, not to pray longer, but to pray differently. Every time you remember shaloo, let it remind you that Jesus never described prayer as begging before a distant God. He revealed prayer as the natural conversation of those who know they are deeply loved. And once that truth settles into your heart, every conversation with heaven begins to change. We are just scratching the surface of this ancient power. Get ready, because in our next video, I will reveal even deeper Aramaic codes that unlock spiritual authority you've never imagined. Make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss this unfolding revelation. The true purpose of this teaching is not simply to learn an ancient word. It is to allow that word to reshape the way you live every single day, beginning tomorrow morning, before reaching for your phone or allowing the worries of the day to fill your mind. Take one quiet minute to become aware of God's presence. Breathe slowly and remember that you are approaching your Father, not a distant ruler. Then gently speak shaloo, meaning to ask with trust, confident expectation, and covenant authority. 3 times, with calm attention. After each repetition, pause for a few moments and silently bring one desire before God, not from fear, not from anxiety, but from complete trust that He already hears you. As you continue this practice day after day, Pay attention to what begins changing first. You may discover that your circumstances are not the first thing to transform. Instead, your heart becomes quieter. Fear begins to lose its grip. Gratitude appears more naturally. Confidence slowly replaces insecurity. This is exactly where authentic spiritual authority begins. Eventually, you may notice something remarkable. You stop measuring prayer only by visible results. You begin recognizing that every sincere moment spent in God's presence is already part of the answer. Peace becomes evidence. Trust becomes strength. Hope becomes your daily companion. That is the quiet revolution Jesus was inviting his followers to experience. Not a religion built upon fear, but a life rooted in relationship. Not helpless begging, but confident trust. Not striving to earn God's attention, but living in the certainty of his love. Just a quick reminder, the transformation guides for a fuller life are waiting for you, right there in the comments. Before you leave, if this message touched your heart or brought new understanding into your life, WRITE, the word restoration, in the comments below. Your testimony may encourage someone else who is seeking healing and renewal. Thank you for sharing this moment of ancient wisdom with us. Until the next revelation, walk in peace, walk in freedom, and walk in the power of shaloo.